So I'm Ellie Wolfe. I'm assistant professor of music education at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. I came professionally to play through my focus on early childhood music. And you might be surprised to learn that there are a lot of people who do early childhood music and don't do a lot of play. That's a different talk. But in learning what works in general early childhood education and what works in early childhood music education and what we can learn from each other really brought me to play. And very quickly that work bubbled up into incorporating play with my undergraduate students and then incorporating play with practicing teachers at all parts of the career spectrum. And then more recently in working with some fellow professors, how we engage in critical reflection on our teaching practices through engaging in play together. So we're gonna look at arts-based play, but to help frame that a little bit, I wanna talk about what play is. So we've heard from quite a few people today about not taking time to try to define play, because there's a lot of challenges with that. But I am going to share the work of a few play scholars so that you can see a collage of what is included as I'm thinking about the term play, and then we'll situate that within arts-based play. So Eberly talks about these emotion-based elements in play, and that these can lead from one to the next, and then it's also cyclical. So as you develop through a play experience, then you become poised to engage in more play. So we're going to think about that. Brown talks about play as the state of being, something that you can see. So when you see another person or another mammal engaged in play, you can tell because you can see them engaged in play, right? If you think of a playful puppy, for instance, it's something that we can see cross species. And that's a place where a lot of educators might want to do some reflection and check ourselves, where sometimes we say we're engaging our students in play as the activity, but if we're thinking of play, it's not the activity, but it's your approach to an activity, then sometimes we're just creating a different kind of work for our students. A couple of challenges from how Brown talks about play as we apply it to education is that it can appear purposeless, and then it needs to be voluntary. So if we're co-opting our students into engaging into an activity, where can we have voluntary moments? Similar, Peter Gray talks about that engaging in play needs to be self-chosen. And Gray goes further to be like, not only do you need to opt in, but you need to be able to quit at any moment for something to be fully play. That it's not about what the activity is, but it's your frame of mind that you bring to that activity. And that this frame of mind needs to be alert, but also unstressed if you're fully engaged in play. And then when you're doing whatever it is you're doing, you have the power to direct your approach to doing it. And then finally, Elkind's kind of gold standard, or here I went with the gold star of play, is self-initiated, spontaneous play. Again, a challenge to try to make that happen in the classroom, right? But I've found some ways through arts-based play that we can approximate and move in that direction, and we'll share those today. So the other part of arts-based play that we need to kind of digest before we can really dig in is what is art. That, you know, could be its own symposium for sure. So here's a 10-second short version of what is art to me in this context. And it's the intentional use or misuse or manipulation of some sort of medium to explore, to communicate, and to provoke maybe an idea or a feeling. So if you think about forms of art that speak to you, perhaps singing or engaging in dance, or a beautiful painting, If you think of the artist's idea of communicating something through that or provoking some sort of response out of you. Additionally, there's art that's not just about this like, hey, we work on it, we work on it, we work on it, and now here's the final product that we're going to show. That's not the part we're going to care about as much today, but this process of moving towards there, and that is exploring an idea. So how can so for instance, my notes from the symposium are color-coded, which people who know me are not surprised, nor that it's hand-drawn. But by using color, for me, that's a way of organizing and understanding and making sense of the material as I'm going through exploring it. That's the short version, and that's all we're going to have time for to talk about art today. My students, I mentioned, are music education students, so their music that they come to me immersed in really is what they might call art music. So they spend untold hours in a practice room where they are working on the same piece over and over and over again. They're polishing it, they're trying to develop their skill at it, and they're trying to make it so that it gets to a point where it's consistent and has like this kind of exalted excellence when they perform it. And as I mentioned, that's not how we're going to think of arts today. We're going to think about how we might use a medium to explore an idea, communicate an idea, or provoke one. So if we combine that idea of art with the idea of play, it's not about the finished product. It's not about the activity we're doing, but it's about creating this playful state of being and this unstressed yet alert frame of mind while we engage with an idea through some sort of art medium. And as we engage with that idea through multiple media, we might further complicate our understanding. So I'm going to quote Roberto Corrado's presentation earlier today, where it connects here is, learning is enhanced when learners take information presented in one format and represent it in another. And that's the same kind of thing I'm talking about here, but thinking about representing through different art media. We also had not Malaguzzi's name mentioned earlier, but Debbie McCoy was talking about the preschool, the Woodbury School at the Strong Museum, and that is heavily inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach. And Malaguzzi is the person who is credited with founding that approach. So Malaguzzi wrote this beautiful poem that I highly recommend you look up, both in its original Italian and its English translation, if you need a translation. But it was on this term, the 100 languages. And the term 100 here is not meant to denote a specific amount, but it's this idea that we have many symbolic systems open to us for developing our understanding and communicating our understanding. And in the Reggio Emilia approach, many of these that are used are arts-based. Often visual arts, but movement arts and sound arts also have a place. And so if we have this idea that exploring a concept can be deepened through translating it into some other medium, then translating it through multiple medium, where each medium has its own affordances and constraints, will give us an even further complicated understanding of the concept it is that we're trying to explore. So we're going to try it a little bit, and then I do have one more slide after this to share like some tips on incorporating this in your teaching. So let's open up the chat, which I had closed because there was too much going on my screen. But I'd like us to think about this issue as a little bit of a chicken and an egg issue. So on the one hand, we need to generate a list of different kinds of art media, and remembering that we're not trying to have this be a perfect final version, right? So if I were to say, hey, let's make some music together, right? I'm a music education professor. I am not with you probably going to sit down at the piano for this, because I would accidentally just play at too high a level and it wouldn't set people at ease. I might, however, pull out my recorder and apologize profusely as we explore a concept through playing the recorder. So let's think about some different art media and just throw them in the chat, and we'll look at them as they come. Yes, I have gotten negative comments on course reviews for requiring students to buy Play-Doh, but we've used it. I've also gotten positive ones. It's also like, hey, there's no textbook for this class. It was $5. Like, all right. But Play-Doh can be a really effective way to explore different ideas. And one of the reasons that I love doing Play-Doh early on when I engage my students in arts-based play is because they have this image of kids doing it and it coming out poorly. So I love painting and I love drawing. Painting, suddenly some students get freaked out that it's not going to look good enough, right? Even though we talk about this exalted, perfected, finished product isn't what we're looking at. But Play-Doh is a great way to jump into this. Collage, for my students, I learned what a mood board was because they wanted to do a specific kind of collage. Memes, yes. Okay. Finger painting, oh, I haven't tried that one, and I think my students are going to do that before the end of the semester. That's going to sneak into our work together. And one of the things that's great about finger painting is it helps get you out of that mind frame of I need to have some beautiful finished product. That's not what art-based play is about. It's about really engaging with an idea through an arts media instead of what comes out. Oh, so many wonderful ideas. Yes, Legos. Doodles, yes. I often purposely draw as badly as I can when we're exploring drawings together, again, to help move us beyond the idea of this beautiful finished product. Sound effects, yes, speaking my language. So many wonderful ideas here. Sock puppets, I haven't gotten that idea before, so thank you for that new one as well. Okay, so I mentioned we had this chicken and the egg thing. We first need to think about what are some different arts media that we could use. And then the other thing we need to think about is what's the concept that we want to have our students dig into a little more. So I was talking with one of my colleagues who teaches a course on computer programming, totally different from anything I do, and sometimes amazed that we can talk to each other so well. And we were talking about what are some things that your students struggle with, and what are some things that my students struggle with, and somewhere we found overlap. So I thought it might be helpful for this presentation is defining a class versus stating instances of that class. So that's going to be different for each of us in whatever field you're in. But looking at, so my aforementioned colored pens, I'm a big fan. So we could look at these pens and we could use it as an example of how do we classify these? How are they a group? What's similar and what's different about them? And so I'm going to actually ask you to do this through some interpretive movements. But I also recognize that might be difficult for some of us, especially with the video recording. So before you start, please feel free to turn off your video for a moment or two. And I'm going to ask you to think about how could you, in some sort of movement, represent individual examples, and then also how could you represent the whole set. So we're going to take just a moment to do that right now. Okay, I'm going to pause you. I think some of us might be thinking through the movements. It is the end of a long but wonderful but long day, and our brains are very overfull. If it weren't the end of the day, I might encourage more forcefully for us to really try out the movements. If you have something in front of you that you can write or draw with, or something on your computer, if you could take a moment and now think about that same concept and try to visually represent it somehow. So not through movement now, but somehow visually represent this idea of the classification, the group name, and then the individual sets. David, can I pick on you?
Yes, you could pick on me. I may fail the challenge, but you could pick on me.
Okay, so what's one way that you could draw something to represent that they all belong to a group, but the things in the group are separate individual things?
I don't know. I would draw an island, and they all live on the island, but there's different zones on the island. Tropical zone, mountain zone, dry zone. They all live in different zones.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And we have in the chat a similar but different idea, having the single trees versus the forest. I initially started to draw candles on a birthday cake because my children told me today that it's one of their half birthdays. So that's where my brain automatically went. So there's lots of possibilities here. And if we explore these through multiple media, we can figure out where we have lapses. So sometimes when we're like, hey, I know this concept and I know it cold, and now I need to describe it through a different art media, we're like, oh, I thought I knew all those connections, but I didn't. Or sometimes it complicates our understanding. So a couple of tips. And there's some more wonderful ideas in the chat. Yes, quiver of arrows, thank you. So some tips for teaching, and I've started to share a few of these already. Share imperfections. It's really important to create the environment where people feel safe sharing this, right? So, David, thanks for letting me pick on you. We don't have time in the Fast and Furious presentation, even after a day together, to make sure to create that environment. But it's really important to create that environment, which we've heard about a little bit earlier today, right? Miranda was talking about how not only do we need to say the right things, we need to back up those right things with our actions, right? There's no right answer. And then we also need to do the work of countering what other instructors have said and done and what that mismatch is. Another thing that's really important is offering real choices when engaging in arts-based play. So I tend to scaffold these choices over time, where at first they might, the art medium might be chosen for them. So you might need to draw. But I start off by saying a few very divergent ways that you might draw. And this is also how I share imperfections, sharing student work anonymously in the next class so that it can be in a PowerPoint and you don't know who it came from, has worked really well for me in the past. But eventually offering really real choices so that they can explore the concept that you want them to explore, but in a way where they can choose, do they want to push themselves or do they want to stick with a medium that is comfortable for them? So I've had students who were incredibly awkward movers who decided that they wanted to explore a concept through interpretive dance and share a video with me. And then I've also had people who might consider themselves awkward movers who are like, absolutely not. I'm going to do this safer choice for me over here, right? And then I've also had some students who have had a lot of movement training, who have been dancers or figure skaters, even I have right now. And so if they choose the interpretive movement, it might feel much more comfortable for them because it's a skill that they've practiced. Another tip that I have for you, if you want to attempt to use this idea of the 100 languages and engaging in different arts media, is to be annoyingly vague. So if we think of the of play not as the activity you're doing, but as the state of mind, being annoyingly vague gives some of that openness so that students will have to do some of that self-direction. They'll have to decide, how am I going to engage with this? And sometimes, yeah, they'll be very annoyed. But then other times, when you do it over time, they get much more comfortable with it, and they push themselves and they try. I already mentioned this idea that there's no right answer. I talk a lot this with my students a lot. For instance, a right answer that many people learn in school is, what color is an apple? Red. Okay, yeah, some apples are red and some are green and some are yellow. And I had a student call out black and was like, yes, but please don't eat that one, right? There's lots of possibilities for answers. And arts-based play is a way to explore a concept without necessarily trying to get everyone to a specific answer. And we've heard a little bit this earlier about welcoming what you receive from the students. And in some research on musical play specifically, actively, verbally demonstrating that you value what you receive can make a really big difference, so that students will continue to try instead of extinguish their behaviors of sharing. And then the big consideration, and I know, right, we've heard about this a few different times about like grading and what do you grade. Uh, for me, for arts-based play, it's about this chance to practice your understanding, to practice retrieving information, to explore in a different way. So my grading is really tough in some parts of my teaching, but on this, it's almost only completion. And then often they have an additional part of their project where they have to reflect on it. And I tend to, in the spirit of this, of giving choice, I let them do a written reflection or a video reflection, though time limits are key, because some students will go on for way more time than you have to spend on listening to the reflections, especially if you have large classes. So in the super fast nutshell, that's a little bit of a taste of what arts-based listening is, arts-based play is, excuse me. The only other thing that I want to offer is this idea that it doesn't work well as a one and done for a lot of the tips that you see here, a lot of these reasons. And you get the most benefit out of it, as we've talked a lot about a lot of forms of play, when you can come back to it in different ways over time. So you can build that classroom community, you can build that rapport, you can build that comfort with putting yourself out there and trying. Thank you.